The dynamic duo is back in the booth, people. The Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast is also back, and thank you for tuning in to today's episode with Steele and Flip. A lot to get to. We have some time to make up for, people, and you know we have the heavy analysis, especially when it comes to everything that continues to fall out from the Calgary Flames and more. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get into it.
You're Locked On Fantasy Hockey, your daily podcast on fantasy hockey. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everybody? And welcome back to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. It is a full roster today with your boy Big Flip Livingstone and my co-host Mr. Steele Roden. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. It feels like a while since I've said that, and boy, does it feel good to be back alongside my boy Steele. And as always, a lot to talk about. And as much as we are fired up for all of our pre-draft preparation, which is set to kick off in only a couple weeks' time, so stay tuned for that, we still have to keep you covered and feed you everything you need to be prepared heading into that time. That means on today's episode, continued discussion about how the Flames and Panthers have fared from a Friday night, late night buster. More to talk about out west with the Edmonton Oilers. A couple of moves here that need to be discussed. Connor McDavid making comments about his goalie. You know we're talking about that. We're also taking a look at John Klingberg and some interesting landing spots that I think you want to hear about at the end of the show, and a quick mention of the New Jersey Devils, who you do not want to sleep on. Steele, thank you for joining me as always, my friend. We're back together doing what we do, and thank you for holding me down while I was away. But let's continue this conversation with the Calgary Flames and Florida Panthers, because I think you did a good job on yesterday's episode of really highlighting this breathed some life back into the Calgary Flames, who were really heading in an awful trajectory this offseason.
Look, Brad Treliving went for a big swing, and he capitalized on a huge moment for the Calgary Flames. Like you said, they were going fully downhill, off a cliff. The upcoming season, their future was at risk here. And Matthew Tkachuk, being a huge asset as he was, he really did help them out for the best. He told them right away, "I'm not re-signing long-term," and they couldn't have hit a bigger home run than this. Jonathan Huberdeau, Mackenzie Weegar, a B-plus prospect, and a 2025 first-round pick. Like, this is a home run, touchdown, like everything you could possibly name in every single sport. Calgary Flames won this trade, in my opinion. I think, to me, Jonathan Huberdeau is even the better player than Matthew Tkachuk. So this was huge for the program for Calgary Flames.
I love that we're getting right into these hot takes right off the bat, because I think very clearly a lot of people in Florida are thinking the opposite of what you just said, and I actually tend to agree with you. And I know Jonathan Huberdeau's stock was a little bit lower because of the performance he put in that final round against the Tampa Bay Lightning especially. He was a bit of a question mark the entire playoff run. But I'm with you. This is a trade that involves two triple-digit point players, and that had the league on notice Saturday morning that both the Calgary Flames and Florida Panthers are not messing around, and more so from the Calgary Flames perspective, Steele. And again, you highlighted it very well on yesterday's episode. If you haven't checked it out, people, make sure you go out there and tune in. And while you're at it, you can smash the subscribe button as well, because you know we appreciate that. But at the same time, I want to focus actually on Mackenzie Weegar in this deal, Steele, because now all of a sudden, and not all of a sudden, because Treliving has been doing a very good job, again, highlighted by you very recently, of building a very rugged back end in Calgary that now features the likes of Weegar, Rasmus Anderson, Noah Hannafin, Chris Tanev, Nikita Zadorov, and Oliver Killington. I believe his first name is Oliver. Anyway, They are a rugged, bruising, and now Weegar, he's coming off a 44-point season, the best of his career. You mentioned the B prospect and a first-rounder. There is a lot to like about this deal from the Calgary Flames perspective, but I really wanted to highlight the addition to the blue line, because I don't want to go up against that blue line if I'm any team in the Western Conference.
It's a scary blue line right now. Very big, very dominant. And we know that guys like Nikita Zadorov are going to be looking for guys with their heads down, coming up the board and laying the bot. And that's what this team does. and some of their guys on the bottom six. I talked about it yesterday too with Milan Lucic, Blake Coleman as well. Or sorry, not Blake Coleman. But those type of guys on the roster.
There's a couple of bruisers down there,
There's a couple of bruisers, but this is what the team's all about. And the fact that they're able to go out and get a playmaker in Jonathan Huberdeau, who can elevate guys now in the top six, like I mentioned, Andrew Mangiapane, Dylan Dube, even get Sean Monahan occasionally back into his game that we saw him a couple years ago playing at an elite level. This is what Jonathan Huberdeau can do, and this is what he's going to do for this team. And if he can re-sign long-term, Calgary's going to be a tough team in out west for many, many years. This deal just saved the Calgary Flames.
I hope so. It is maybe a bit of a bold statement given that they did lose Gaudreau and Tkachuk, but boy, did it salvage the direction they were heading for sure in a hurry, because Huberdeau is not a one-dimensional player. He can do a little bit of everything. He does have Selke skills woven into the fabric of his ability. I know I'm getting crazy here with the adjectives and the descriptions, but the other point I wanted to bring up here, Steele, is chemistry. Chemistry that he might be able to form alongside another very Alexander Barkov-esque player in Elias Lindholm. I love the potential for those two players to feed each other the puck. And, from a fantasy side of things, I'm definitely going to take a look at some of those peripheral pieces that now are going to have opportunity to move up the lineup. You mentioned Mangiapane. There is a hole in Gaudreau's hole to fill in that slot in the lineup. And I'm excited to see who slots in there, Steele, because immediately those are fantasy assets you have to target. Because come on now, Huberdeau is still going to get his. That defense is Studley propping up that forward group. We know Markstrom is having another good season after the one he had last year. And I'll leave you with this. Because the Flames continue to stack first-round picks, they now have a 2023, 2024, and 2025 first-rounder and a couple of interesting pieces still out there on the market, Steele. I expect the Calgary Flames to continue to be active.
Yeah, they have a bright future holding with all the prospects and picks they hold right now, especially, like I said, if they're able to re-sign long-term Huberdeau and Weegar, it just solidifies their team out west for many, many years. I really do think Jonathan Huberdeau has hit his stride the last 5 years. Obviously, this probably being the peak. 29 years old, just coming off a 115-point season.
Yes, sir.
He's in his prime right now. This is probably the peak. I'm not sure if he'll be able to get 115 points again. I still think he can get 100 plus. But I'm not sure if he gets 115 more. But he's still that dominant player. And while you and I are talking about how this was a win situation for the Calgary Flames, I believe we both think that they won this trade. This is still a win for the Florida Panthers too, because they're getting Matthew Tkachuk, and this is exactly what their team needs right now. A guy who can put the puck in the back of the net, set up teammates, but also agitates and gets in the minds of their opponents. And that's exactly what the Florida Panthers didn't have in that second round series against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And I love what Matthew Tkachuk had to say in that press conference with the Panthers. Sure. He's like, look, I love the Battle of Alberta, absolutely loved playing against Edmonton, but I hate the Tampa Bay Lightning now even more. So we just got a bigger battle of Florida now, and I'm absolutely here for it.
I'm intriguing to see, what some of these subtractions from the Florida Panthers lineup do. And, they lost Mason Marchment as well. You take away Huberdeau, who really has been one of those faces of the franchise for a number of seasons. I'm loving the top line of Barkov, Tkachuk, and Carter Verhaeghe is what, potentially would be. Obviously, there's going to be some slotting around. But let's see what the Florida Panthers do without, Claude Giroux as well, who was there at the end of the season. They've lost a little bit of the teeth of their attack, a little bit. But Tkachuk is still one of those guys, like you said. He brings an edge. He brings a dimension of his game that can really change the pace and the momentum of any situation. And that's something that they lacked in the playoffs last year. And they went out and they addressed that issue. So, as always, Steele, I'm excited to see how that shakes out. And it will have fantasy impacts for the Florida Panthers as well. All of this is going to be broken down over the coming weeks in the lead up to your fantasy drafts, people. So make sure you are tapped right into the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And we're going to be making a bunch of bets, including futures, awards, and others. And make sure you head over to betonline.net to make those bets. the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. You can find all your favorite sports and events on BetOnline, your number one online source for odds, lines, and games, reviews, news from every league, including MLB, NFL, NBA, NHL, and more. BetOnline continues to be the top online source for all of your wagering info from live in-game betting, scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to see what is going down right now. BetOnline, where the game starts.
Thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Don't forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, which also includes YouTube. So please make sure you hammer the subscribe, hammer the follow button. Flip and I appreciate all the love and support out there. And thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast with Big Flip Livingstone and Steele Roden. And Flip, let's stay out west and actually in Alberta.
Please.
And let's go over to the Edmonton Oilers now. Obviously, Connor McDavid making a couple of statements about his newly acquired goaltender, Jack Campbell.
Yes, sir.
If he can play for the Toronto Maple Leafs, he can play for anyone. And he's super excited and super happy to be playing with him this upcoming season. How did you take those comments? Because after, reading them, after hearing that, I'm not really sure whether to take it as a dig at the Toronto Maple Leafs or what the comment was, but obviously he's excited to play with Jack Campbell right now.
Quote, obviously, Toronto is a hockey hotbed and there's a tremendous amount of pressure on whoever fills that net. He's occupied that job for the better part of 2 seasons, and he's done a great job doing it, so I'm sure he'll transition smoothly. End quote. If I was Jack Campbell and Connor McDavid, I might take a deep look at the blue line core I have in Edmonton right now, and I would also take a look at Jack Campbell's performances over the past 2 playoffs, because as much as I love 48, 12, and 8 in the regular season, I don't like how at times Campbell disappears and shrinks away in the big moment. It's easy for me to criticize him now as he's left the building in Toronto. And hey, would I have liked Jack Campbell back? Maybe, but not for the price he would have had to pay given his track record in the playoffs. I need someone who can get the job done. I know Toronto did not go out and do that. Please don't get that twisted. But for Connor McDavid to come out and say that, he's doing a great job as a captain to pump his goalie's tires. But I think he's a little bit off the mark, Steele. And I'll throw it back over to you because I will say Jack Campbell did have amazing stretches in Toronto. 48, 12, and 8 is amazing in the regular season. But guess what? They don't give away trophies for regular season performances, and Connor McDavid should know that better than anybody.
Look, with Jack Campbell, I think he did a relatively good job with the Toronto Maple Leafs in the postseason. I think there were times where we saw them hang him out to dry in the defensive zone. So I can't put the blame all on him.
No.
And if the Edmonton Oilers can get all the way to the Western Conference Finals with Mike Smith, and I said this before, they can for sure get to the Stanley Cup Finals with Jack Campbell in the crease, in the blue paint. So
good point, Steele. Good point.
Great on Connor McDavid as a captain to come out and say this. If I was Connor McDavid with the goaltending and the years that I've been playing with Edmonton and everything that has pretty much just gone sour for him, I would be excited and jumping up and down after this signing as well. And I would be coming out and saying that too about my newly acquired goaltender. I think this is great for the Edmonton Oilers. I think they have a legitimate chance, even though their defensive core is pretty much the same. Obviously a couple of changes to the bottom 6 forwards as well. But if they can look, they still got Connor McDavid. They still got Leon Draisaitl.
Yes.
They re-signed Evander Kane. Zach Hyman's an absolute beauty.
Yep.
Jack Campbell now instead of Mike Smith. This team can make it to the Stanley Cup Finals after just making it to the Western Conference Finals last year.
Yes, sir. That is a fact. If I want to poke holes in what you were saying, maybe I say that their path through the playoffs last year, through the LA Kings and Calgary Flames, was maybe a bit of an easy one. But that's nitpicking because you are right. They have 2 of the best players in the game and the best player in the game in Connor McDavid. That makes you a factor no matter what. And now you've upgraded your goaltending situation. You re-signed Jesse Puljujarvi, who's coming off a career-high 14 goals, 22 assists. Nice little third-line addition for the Edmonton Oilers. You know that this is a top-heavy club. But Steele, Darnell Nurse, Cody Ceci, Brett Kulak, Evan Bouchard, Tyson Barrie. there are some question marks there on that blue line, especially defensively, because I know Tyson Barrie and Cody Ceci sometimes can bring that element of offense. And I like where Evan Bouchard is headed. Maybe he takes a huge step forward, Steele. He is going to be one of my players on the bubble this year that you might be boom or bust situations. He is on that list. I don't know what you think about that take.
I was going to say the exact same thing. Obviously, Darnell Nurse, their best defenseman, a guy you're going to be taking in the top 5 rounds if you can be that lucky to acquire him for your fantasy team. The second guy in line for me is Evan Bouchard. He's really stepped up. I saw a lot of great highlights and great flashes last season. I think there were times where obviously he was not confident with the puck. He, was very fast-minded and he wanted to make the play super quick, but didn't think about the consequences of that play specifically. He bobbled the puck at times, a ton of giveaways that shouldn't have happened. But there were some upsides to his game, and he has a very underrated shot and capability of walking the blue line and finding the lane to get the shot on net, which I noticed last year. So he is heading in the right direction. But like you said, guys like Tyson Barrie, Cody Ceci, Brett Kulak, these are guys that are pretty much washed up has-beens who are not going to bring a lot of fantasy points to your team and are not really going to help a lot for the Edmonton Oilers on the blue line. So like you and I have mentioned over the last couple of seasons, or for them specifically over the last couple of seasons, they need a lot of help on the blue line.
Yeah, I think Brett Kulak, can be serviceable, but in the right situations and not when it comes to the reliability, the amount that they have to rely on a guy like Brett Kulak in Edmonton. That really kind of exposes his weaknesses much more, and you hit it out of the park. Fantasy-wise, other than Tyson Barrie, those are defensemen to for sure avoid at all costs. But I'll leave it at this. The Edmonton Oilers overall, I think the comments about Jack Campbell may have been a bit bold, but it's nice to tie that all into what's going on out west. And Evan Bouchard, 12 goals and 31 assists, too many giveaways, 79 giveaways to 37 takeaways.
Yeah.
Those don't really show up a lot on the fantasy score sheet that often, unless it is plus minus.
Yeah.
So Evan Bouchard immediately for me, Steele, after the conversation we just had, is going to be one of those guys that for sure is on the bubble. Also, if he starts to get some more power play time on a unit with Leon Draisaitl and others that we mentioned, obviously McJesus, that's a full stop right there. But also a full stop. We have a lot more to talk about on this show, including landing spots for John Klingberg very quickly. And I'm loving me some New Jersey Devils action. They have a big signing with their boy Siegenthaler, and that might be an under-the-radar name, but it might be an overpay. Lots to talk about, Steele, so let's get to it.
Yeah, thank you so much for making the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast your first listen every single day. Again, don't forget we are free and available on all podcast platforms, which also includes YouTube. So if you want to see the beautiful faces of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast, you got to make sure you subscribe and hit the follow button. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode of the Locked On Fantasy Hockey Podcast. And let's keep it rolling, Flip. Like you said, Jonas Seigenthaler signing a 5-year deal with the New Jersey Devils at $17 million. And like you said, this is a guy who you're not really going to know a lot about. He was drafted by the Washington Capitals, played 3 or 4 seasons with them, has played 2 seasons now with the New Jersey Devils.
Yeah, he has.
And like you said, he's not really a guy you're not going to know a lot about him. But he does bring a decent amount to the table. I said this to you off air. I think it was a bit of an overpay. 3.4 annually, 17 million over 5 years. I think that's an overpay for a guy who's putting up 1 goal, 14 points, a career high of 14 points just this past season in 70 games. Yep. But on the upside, like you said, he led the team, or he was second in team in hits.
He can hit. He blocks shots. He is the kind of player that, we're not mentioning this for his fantasy impact. We're mentioning it that he frees up the ice for some other blue liners and forwards on this New Jersey Devils crew that I already liked as a target for fantasy value overall. Now you have a guy in the mix controlled for a number of seasons that we know frees up the ice for the rest of the players and the blue liners in this New Jersey Devils locker room. And the right side of this team, Steele, is something that needs to be discussed from a defensive side of things. Because Dougie Hamilton, Damon Severson, John Marino, and their draft pick in Simon Nemec, who is a very, very interesting name. This kid just came off a postseason in Slovakia playing in the Elite League with men at 18. He put up 17 points in 19 games. This is a guy that you should have your eye on. If you in a dynasty format and you can stash a couple of guys on a minor roster, I know in one of my leagues, we can draft 3 minor roster spots a season and stash them in the minors and move them up when ready. Namitch is one of those guys, Steele.
Yes.
He's a second overall pick, and all of a sudden, the New Jersey Devils, there's a lot to like. And I know Vitek Vanacek and Mackenzie Blackwood, the book is out on both of them. But I think you and I can both agree that there is a lot to like from this New Jersey Devils lineup, both fantasy-wise and just overall success-wise for this team.
Yeah, and to start with Simon Nemec, clearly there's something great about him because he worked his way up the ranking system in the prospect pool, starting at, I believe, 13, getting to 11, getting to number 7 and number 4 midway through the season, and obviously getting drafted at number 2 by the New Jersey Devils.
Yes,
so there's clearly something they really, really love about this guy, and he's going to be in the lineup very, very soon. So definitely a guy to keep an eye on for your fantasy teams as well.
Yep.
Especially as a rookie.
Yeah.
But like you said, there's a lot. This team is very young. You and I have talked about this team a lot since the trade.
We have.
Since the beginning of offseason.
Yes,
they've made some smart moves. They've made some great moves that they really needed to elevate their team and make a decent push for a wild card spot or even a playoff spot. Obviously in the crease on the blue line, and now obviously they tried swinging for Johnny Gaudreau, wasn't able to happen. They have a fallback plan. Andre Palat, $6 million, maybe a little bit of an overpay. It's a debate, but he brings a lot to the table, and I think he can really help this young team offensively.
Eric Halla added as well. Nice little depth piece up the middle. I don't hate what they have going on up the middle either, Steele. Nico Hischier, Jack Hughes, Eric Halla, and Michael McLeod, again, banger leagues. Deep fantasy, dynasty situations. These are some of those bargain bin players that you have to keep your eye on. And the New Jersey Devils are exactly the unit to be looking at because other GMs are not going to dig in the trenches. That's what you need to do to make that paper. Every good fantasy GM that I know always sneaks in at least 1 or 2 under the radar picks. And these players deep down the roster in deeper formats on the New Jersey Devils could be those players, Steele.
Yeah, and don't worry. Flip and I are going to watch your backs. We'll have your backs. We're going to keep you up to date and making sure you know who to pick, where to pick, and all the signings and trades, what you should do for your fantasy team to make sure it's on an elite level. And to make sure that happens as well, we should talk about a guy who's still a UFA, who might be on the move next very, very soon, and that's John Klingberg. And I know you have a lot to say about this guy and where he might potentially land this upcoming season.
Yeah, let me hit you with this. And I'm not the first guy to come out and say that I think the Seattle Kraken would be a good fit for John Klingberg. So let me not say that this is the first time someone on the internet has said this, but they need a puck-moving defenseman. They have a little bit of cap space left to work with. They also have a nice blue line core that I think Klingberg would fit very nicely in. And if you're the Seattle Kraken's front office, Ron Francis, a GM there, he has a lot on his plate to make this team better. And the defensive core is the closest thing to pushing them into relevancy. Vince Dunn, Adam Larson, Jamie Alexiak, Justin Schultz, decent top 4. You put Klingberg in that mix, they're even better. And you also slot him along a big, brute, heavy stay-at-home defenseman that is Jamie Alexiak. Oh, a player that he has ton of time playing alongside. I all of a sudden like some of these peripheral pieces on the blue line for the defensive pairings in Seattle. Vince Dunn and Klingberg together could be a nice little package there, Steele. And we talk about beignets up front, Oliver Bjorkstrand. Maybe Wenberg has a bounce-back season. Andre Burakovsky was signed. So I think what the takeaway is here is Klingberg's going somewhere, and he looks like a fit in Seattle. That's a team that could very much use a veteran presence, one that can bring an offensive upside and move the puck. They need all of those. He checks all the boxes, and I'm going to say the Seattle Kraken are going to be taking a swing at Klingberg if they haven't already.
And I think that really does make really does make or break this team for the upcoming season and for their future as well. If they're able to land a guy like John Klingberg, because I think people tend to forget that they have a really great goaltending duo here. Philip Grubauer, who was with the Colorado Avalanche, who played phenomenally with them before, obviously signing with the Seattle Kraken. A backup goaltender who could be a starter as well, Chris Drieger. Obviously, he just had off-season surgery. He's going to miss half the season, but people tend to forget that they have some great goaltending. So in the near future, this team could be really, really good in the Western Conference. So people tend to forget that, as well as they do have some great pieces up front. I'm a big fan of Jared McCann. I mention him all the time as a weekly player to pick up on Mondays for the week, because he does tend to have good stretches of productivity in the offensive zone. Jaden Schwartz, Jordan Eberle, guys who are still up front too, who were great, who found some great chemistry last year. Seattle is heading in the right direction. They're obviously, it's not going to be a big leap, but they're heading in the right direction right now.
I think it's going to be a slow burn in Seattle, but you're doing a good job of highlighting some players that also, they just didn't have good seasons last year. Heading into a franchise situation, a new season, a new franchise. If we take a look at the history in the NHL, there is one expansion team that had success. That's the Vegas Golden Knights, and they were handed a very favorable set of cards to enter into the NHL. I know the Seattle Kraken were dealing with basically the same set of rules, but they did not benefit from the same expansive draft opportunities. They did not get a Marc-Andre Fleury to kick off their franchise. And as much as I like Philip Grubauer and the options they have in net, they did not have the options to go with a guy like Marc-Andre Fleury. So, again, though, Steele, the main takeaway here is don't sleep on some of these teams that might not be in the top portion of the league standings. That don't really matter all the time when it comes to finding fantasy studs. Like I said, do your research, tap into the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast, and make sure you are listening to some of these more under-the-radar moves, because you can really make some awesome picks and pick up guys that other GMs won't be looking at. And that's why we're mentioning some of these Seattle Kraken players. But I do think John Klingberg's going to be on the move soon, and I will expect him to be landing in Seattle still.
Under the radar players are what set your fantasy team above and beyond. Make sure you keep on tuning in to the Locked On Fantasy Hockey podcast. Thank you for making it your first listen every single day. For your second listen, though, go check out Locked On NHL. Locked On experts give you a daily 30-minute podcast on all things NHL all year long. Stay up to date on everything in the hockey world. Locked On NHL, your daily 30-minute NHL podcast. It's free and available wherever you get your podcast, just like this one right here. So again, please make sure you hit the subscribe, hit the follow button. Thank you so much for following us and tuning in for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode with Flip and I. Have a great day. Good luck with all your bets out there, and we shall see you back here again tomorrow.
Peace.